Okay, it's time for us to start adding some functionality to our login screen. This is what we have so far, and now we need something to happen when we press the sign in button. So now that we're adding functionality to the code, this is typically the point at which we would write a test where we're doing test-driven development. So I want to demonstrate that to you now. If we go into the editor, we first need to create a test file for our login activity. In a JetBrains editor, I can do this by putting my cursor on the class and hitting Command-Shift-T. That will create a new test. I'm actually not going to do that in this case because it creates a Java file, and what I want is a Kotlin file. So this is what we're going to do instead. I'm going to go to my main activity. I'm going to hit Command-Shift-T to jump to my test, and I'm going to hit F5. I want to create a login activity test. Add that file to Git. So now I have my login activity test. I want to find where it says main activity right here, hit Option up to collect it, and then I'm going to change that to login activity. So now I'm using Roboelectric to build a login activity. I run create, visible, and get. That's fine by me. But I don't need a fixed action button this time. Instead, I need access to my sign in button, which we can go take a look at in activity login. So where's our button at? Right down here, the ID is button. That's not specific enough for me, so I'm going to rename that to sign in button. Cool. I tend to say sign in rather than login because there seems to be debate about whether login is one word or two words, and I just don't want to get into it. Sign in generally is like interpreted as a verb, which is two words. And so I use that because it's clear. All right. And so then we're going to rename fixed action button to sign in button. We're going to find the view, but it's going to be a button, not a floating action button. And it's going to be called sign in button. I'm going to hit Option Enter to import button. All right. So I'm clicking on my sign in button right there. I don't need these other three lines though. The support fragment manager stuff, this is not what I'm going to do. What I want to do when I click that sign in button for now is I want to assert that clicking on my sign in button causes us to advance to the main activity screen where we can see all of our tabs. So can this activity start a new activity is a fairly standard test that we might write with something like Roboelectric. So this is how we would go about doing that. We're going to say we want something called an intent. An intent is a way that Android passes information between components that the OS needs to see. Those are the kind of components that you find in the Android manifest, which is the file that we updated 2 videos ago in order to add our activity to it. If you're trying to send broadcasts in an Android application or start new activities or use services, then you're going to do that with an intent. So we're going to create an intent here, and that intent is going to take 2 arguments, a context and a class. For our context, we're going to use the current activity that we're in, system under test. Then we need to give it a class. This is where that intent is headed. So we're going to give it main activity class .java like this. I'm going to hit Command Option V to extract a variable of my intent, and I'm going to call that intent. That's fine by me. Now, it's time for us to do an assertion. I want to assert equal 2 things. The first of them is going to be intent component. Now this is can be null, so we're going to have to use a question mark on the end of it. Class name. This is going to tell me the name of the class of the intent's destination. So that's intent component class name. This is our actual value. Now we need to put in our expected value. So ahead of intent.component.class name, it's time for me to put in my expected value. And here's how I'm going to do that. I'm going to use something that we get from Roboelectric called shadows. So it's going to be shadows dot shadow of, and I'm going to get the shadow of my system under test. I'm going to hit Option Enter to import shadows. This is going to give me what's called a shadow activity, which is in Roboelectric speak is going to be the version of this activity that is created within Roboelectric's representation of our application. So shadow of system under test, and I want to get that thing's next started activity. The next started activity will also have a component, and that component will have a class name. So now I have my two things. The reason that we cannot directly compare the next started activity of the system under test to this intent is that equals doesn't use argument equality or value equality. It uses reference equality for an object like an activity. And so this intent, while being identical to this one in the ways that we care about, isn't the same exact object. So the test would fail even if these two values are the same, which is what we're looking for. Now, when we do test-driven development, we follow a cycle called red, green, refactor. The first one is red. We write a test and we make sure that it fails. The second one is green. We write the implementation and we make sure the test passes. The third is refactor. This is where we make any changes to the code that we would like to make that shouldn't affect its functionality and allow the test to reassure us that the code still works. We're currently in the red stage, so this test should fail. We'll give it a minute to run. Now, the ideal failure, the correct failure here, will be if the intent was expected to be something but is in fact null. So let's take a look. The next started activity must not be null. So this is the right failure. We don't currently start an activity when somebody clicks the sign in button. So that's the functionality that we need to add. So now I'm going to get back in my code window, go to the login activity test class name, and hit Command-Shift-T to jump back to the implementation. After my content view is set, I'm ready to start pulling references to the items in my layout. So that's what I'm going to do here. I want to find my view. It's going to be a button. The ID is going to be r.id.signinButton. I'm going to hit Option Enter to get my import. I'm going to hit Command Option V to extract a variable. I'm going to pick the full scope of the Find View by ID. That's going to give me my sign in button. Now I'm going to add an on-click listener to my sign in button. I'm going to say sign in button dot set on click listener. And I'm going to use a closure like this. All right, so now it's time for me to start my next activity. I do that by using the method start activity, which takes an intent. So that'll be First, our context, rather intent. With our context, this login activity, and then our main activity. Cool. So now I'm going to hit Control R to rerun my test. And now the test passes. So we're now at the green stage. At this point, we could do some refactoring if we wanted to, but this code, there isn't really anything that I would want to optimize in this code right now. So we'll skip the refactor step for now. What I would like to do is run the app and show you what happens now. So now we can put in our email address and we can put in our password. And then when we click this button, we're taken to our main activity.